This conversation is taking place as part of the Africa Migration Report Poetry Anthology series, which we are currently working on. The Poetry Anthology series was inspired by the Africa Migration Report produced by the African Union and IOM, which presents research on African migration and mobility. And while the AU and IOM's report is a formal report, our poetry anthology explores the past, present, and futures of African migration through poetry, prose, and conversations such as these with poets and other writers who are working on the theme of African migration. We've got an open call for submissions. The call is open 365 days a year because every day is Africa Day. And then we are also organizing a series of readings and conversations like this, not only with other scholars who are writing on African migration and literature, but also with the poets who are contributing to the anthology. Okay. Because we would also like to center that orality, the oral cultures, and to have these conversations, because we learn from each other by coming together and talking to each other. Absolutely. And for those who are joining us, we are listening to Professors Losambe and Ojaide, who are editors of the Routledge Handbook of the New African Diasporic Literature. One of the things that I noticed about Africa, African migration, African people even, is that most of the definitions that we use did not come from Africans. You know, other people are defining Africa, are defining Africans. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So you could. Okay. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
You will see. I think you're on the screen.
Oh, you are.
What I want, huh?
Yeah,
okay,
you are.
Yeah. Okay. You will see that. See, since Africa was colonized, see, Africa was balkanized. Look at the different countries in Africa. So once you are being dominated by imperialists, see, the imperial power is not the same as African power. Africa doesn't have whether the military power or anything. In the world today, in which you have CNN, you have BBC going almost everywhere. You see, it's not the same. You see, the power of the word that you can reach so many people and define them is because of the imperial power, your wealth, your history, that you define people. It's difficult for Africans to define others as they used to define us. But I think Africans now understand what it means to name themselves. There was a time when they called us names. Like, for instance, in my classes, you don't use the word tribe. You don't use the word tribe.
Yeah.
You don't use the word tribe. When you look at countries in Europe or all these small countries, they're not up to the Yoruba people, the Hausa people, or the Igbo people, and you call them tribe. You don't use tribe. And since America doesn't use village, and the village is loaded, don't use African village in my class. And so there was a time when they could define us. See, colonialists and imperialists have to define you to have a rationale to rule you. They want to educate you. One of the false reasons given for colonization was Africans were tabula rasa, they were not civilized, so they needed to be civilized. So they gave you names, they gave names to everything. Whatever they came to, the British changed names of people. If a place is called Uriapele, they call it Sapele. Look at India, everywhere. So they named you. And it's left for Africans of today to fight back, to reclaim their identity. See, they use their own, this idea of creating the other, which is the antithesis of civilization. They were the civilized, others were not civilized. So you needed to civilize them. And if they gave you names, it's left for Africans and others who have been colonized, who are under imperial something, to now bring back and call themselves what they are. Many times people ask me, my name is Tanure Ojaide. Oh, you don't have another name, English name? Since I was a student at Syracuse University so many years back, I said, no, I have one name. What is the name? Tanure. And I teach them how to pronounce it. And I have only 2 names. Even when they say, put 3 names, what is your middle name? I don't have a middle name. They come to accept it. So I think when you say about the other world, they had the advantage. They had the advantage. The colonialists, imperialists, they have the advantage. But it's left for us now as independent countries to really reaccept our own identity and be what we are. So I feel we're making some progress, but we could do better. If some white lady named the country Nigeria or something, it's not for the country, but you can see Ghana, you can see Zaire, all these things. So it depends on the country. And if we have visionary leaders and subjects and intellectuals, I think something better will be done to define ourselves rather than allow others to define themselves. Just before this program, I was talking with my colleague, and you see the way once there's a new disease, they will give it, they try to give it a name and say, oh, it came from here, it came from here. You see, they have the voice. See, that's, oh, AIDS came from Africa, this Marburg came from, this came from Africa. And yet, when you look at their labs, they have those the vaccines in their lab already. When they don't suffer from the disease, how did they get these things? So I think that Africans need to tell the world who they are, what they are, rather than just feel that we will be defined by, we will be defined in the way we like. We give ourselves our name. My name is this, you call me like that. And just to bring something about this globalization. Globalization was supposed to be a 2-way traffic, but it seems to me it's almost a 1-way from north to south. As in fact, when you look at it, it's more of consumption by the south, like in Africa, than exporting other things. And with that type of thing, we are giving out too little for so much we receive, so much negativity we receive from the outside.
Yeah, I wanted to add something to that as well. That's very good. And this is Ross, what I found is the colonial thrust within the diasporic writings. It is a refusal to be constructed, and so refusal to have that expressive, that consciousness that the other cannot, define you. And so you see, for instance, the politics, what the new writings has done to the politics even of women's of hair, dressing the way. Look at, at a certain point now, if you see young African women here or African American, these days, there is a preference to keep your own natural hair and be proud of it. It is something that is addressed in our anthology. Some people, the Portuguese, on a Portuguese writer. And so you have the colonial said, well, why can't you keep your accent as Nigerian? And then you start faking something that you are not going to be dream in it or do something like, no, speak the way you speak. And then in this environment, and the people intelligibly understand you. And also in terms of text, when they have what we call a metonymic gap, where sometimes you find terms, Igbo, Yoruba, Kikongo terms used in the text without being translated because they cannot be translated, and so they are like that, and so that is also a refusal to be to be constructed, to be told that you have it to be. And so as you're saying that sometimes African scholars themselves probably will use Western terms to define, but also, for instance, that is something we did with the Janusian. we went back to, we used the Sankofan term, and the Sankofa, that is a Ghanaian, the bird within the Ghanaian mythology that looks backward and really that well-being here. But this is really very descriptive of the first generation. But the second generation, we have the Janusian. So, but do you remember if you go back and read what Sheikh Anta Diop wrote, what Mvenga wrote, that Africans contributed significantly towards the making of Greco-Roman civilization. And even those terms there. And so claiming that a part of heritage is not also purposely, because if we go to some of all those years before Christ, when Africans really, interacted with, or the Romans came, you had that, era of Cleopatra who learned African languages, ancient Egyptians and others. And so we have, we have to be aware of that history as well, so that we are not necessarily essentialist in looking at necessarily saying that, okay, within a diasporic space where we have a conjunction of experiences now, that we should not necessarily see something that defines us from our own conjunctive encounter from the beginning, when things were not as they were constructed under colonialism and enslavement. And so we have that sense of history as, people like Sheikh Anta Diop have said, Wang and others who always, Chancellor Williams, who took us to, as African scholars, to learn and deconstruct the history so that we move with that history, not necessarily, and even African Americans, when Gates wrote the signifying monkey and the figure of the shoe, the god of interpretation and Hermes. And this is all the attempt to try to come to terms with, instead of using hermeneutics, then we have also saying that something else also existed within our own originary locations, which we could use sometimes when certain situations cannot be really translated into the languages that certainly are the foreign languages. And so this is what something that we had, that there was a conference, I told Losambe, 1997 at Ohio State University, a conference that was convened by people who were there, Biola Irele, Apia was there, Ali Mazuri, Isidoro Peu, all of us, that conference had, it was summoned, really, it was convened to address what they call labeling. And that is where, it is from where that the names like Black Studies became African and African American, to acknowledge, the cultural, rather than yielding to the construction of same and blackness all over the place, or something like that. But it is a very important question. Thank you.
I think I know the time is going. I wanted to add add something. Yeah, if you look at there are some African writers in the diaspora who want to write and do things the Western way so as to get published. If you look at the publishers, there are sometimes you send something which is African, something with hope, with Africanness, Africanity in it. The publishers will feel, no, Africa is not like this. I've talked with fellow writers like Sicheni Koka and others who write a fine novel. Oh, your novel is fine, but Africa is not. So, and because of that, I think mostly younger writers, they want to write something about Africa which will be negative, just for the publishers to accept them and publish them, because they feel such things will sell. So I think there should be a caution to African writers in the diaspora that they should not play to the gallery of the West to just write anything about Africa so as to get published, get fame in the West. In the end, it will be against them that they sold Africa just for the sake of popularity or fame and money in the West. Because I say trend for some writers who will write about Africa, what is not in Africa, or what is minor. They try to play it big. Oh, there was this, certain practices that the West like, and they want others to accept, almost force on others. So sometimes some of us writers, it could be a few, but also in a way try to help the Western labeling of Africa rather than we to be what we are.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know, is there anyone who's got questions, comments, anything they would like to say? If you do, just unmute and you know, let us hear you. Okay, so while people are thinking, I've got another question. In your view, what is the value of doing things like this, meeting and talking the way that we are doing right now?
This is a conversation, as you called it. It's a conversation, and it's taking place in the global north, in the West. So it helps, as my colleague has said about the importance of our teaching when we're working here. You know more about the condition of the the new diasporan, African diasporan, or the new African immigrant. You have a taste of what they're doing. So doing this type of thing, it educates all sides, those in the homeland, those outside, and I think it helps to bring things together, because even when you look at African literature now, it's been divided into literature written by Africans in Africa and literature written by Africans outside Africa. And when it comes to a stage where literature written outside the homeland, because of the publishers and something has more publicity, I think it's not too good. You see, we have to look at it in the same way that when Europeans or Americans write, you can write better American literature outside of America, in Asia or Oceania or something, or you can write the better European literature outside of Europe. But there seems to be a division, because I'm at home in Africa and here, I can see that as if they're separating those writers who are in Africa and those writers that are outside. So this type of occasion, I think, would be a measure of trying to bring together, coalesce the African voice, whether in diaspora or in the homeland. I think that's one of the functions of this type of thing.
Yeah, I agree. This is a very good forum for us because a number of us here tended to be disconnected or separated from those who are in Africa, especially if you spend some years, you don't go very often there. And there are many African writers who remain there, young writers, such as when I went to the Congo a couple of years ago, I found that so many talented young writers who were struggling and they self-publishing there, but they are not, we don't know what is going on. And so a forum like this that can enable us from time to time to be in contact with those who are there, like scholars who are in Nigeria there, like in South Africa, and we here, and we participate, ask the questions, have lectures in this. That's something that the yearly African Literature Association has in a series where Tanure and I recently had to talk in this manner as well. But you can really enlarge it so that I don't know whether you have many people from the continent also being included or being sent to this page so that they can also be coming. But otherwise, we need this kind of interaction a lot because we do a lot of work here. Most of it is not accessible to those people who are on the continent, and the same thing also with what they have there, and we have no access to that. So that if this interaction is taking a place constantly, we are able to update ourselves in our theory, in our creative writing, and we know that we are moving with the world. Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got Joseph who wants to say something.
Joseph Obona, yeah.
If you can unmute and while Joseph is unmuting, maybe you could also say something about orality, oral cultures, and literature as it is otherwise understood.
Yeah, oral literature. See, there are non-literate societies like traditional African societies, even though there were different types of writing other than this Roman, English, French, and so forth. If you look at most African ethnic groups, they have a lot of beautiful poetry, beautiful, far more beautiful than some of the type of poetry were taught. Some imperialist poetry were taught about British poetry, other poetries, which are not as good. So orality, at least on the Sankofan group, which I talked about, see, the orality is the basis. See, there's no way, if you are raised in Africa, you were born in Africa, you grew up to the age of 15, 18, 20 something. It is something you acquire as a citizen or as a subject of that place. Your mates cannot be doing something, your age group cannot be doing something, and you'll be away. So these are things you learn. You hear the different performances, the festivals, and so many things. And for me as a poet, for me as a speaking for myself, there's just no way I can forget those things. And when I went to school, the Western school, and I was reading poetry, I knew that the songs that my grandmother was singing to me were more poetic than the poems, many poems that I was being taught in schools. So, that is the way you have to imbibe. These are things most of us imbibe these things, and I teach oral literature, folklore of Africa, and the African diaspora. That's what that's one of the courses I teach, and I think I've imbibed a lot of the orality of African culture, even though I'm using English to write poems, but I use it in a way with the orality embedded in it. It's embedded in the poetry. You can almost feel the rhythm, the chant-like nature of it. So orality is very, for those of us of the Sankofan group, my colleague and myself, that's it's something we're brought up with, and it's part of you. And in fact, it gives a certain essential identity to you, that this is a poetry which is very, a lot of vitality in it. It's very dramatic, and you can easily engage in it. See, even the audience, and sometimes you see when Africans are singing, whether Africans or even Black Americans, you see that at a certain point, everybody could join, something which brings people together. It's communal. And when you add that to the literacy, which tends to be more individualistic, I think if one can combine them well, you have good writing, whether it's in poetry or even fiction.
Yeah, this is something that the late Isidore Opewo, and that is something that I learned. You see, when I went to Nigeria, coming from a Francophone kind of, coming from an assimilationist Belgian boarding school and the universities in the Congo, I was not very much exposed to the study of oral literature in a manner that when I went to Nigeria, and at the University of Ibadan, we had Isidore Opewo, and who was in the 80s, who became a very strong scholar of oral literature coming from the classical type, but then he branched into that, and so he was a very great resource. So I remember when I went to Ibadan, all graduate students had to take a course, Opewo's course in oral literature. And it was really so rich, the engagement, and all of us found that oral literature existed in all African societies, and poetry, even in tales, those long, epic stories, and very, very well with the complex aesthetic structures, and now those such courses led us to want to investigate more and more, so that there are people who are like Gigi Dara, who are writing a doctoral thesis in Ibadan, really on oral literature. And it led me to the book I edited on Introduction to African Prose Narrative. I start with oral literature, and so we had the essays on oral literature, and there in my introduction I was stating that any history of African literature should start from its base, oral literature, to move on to the contemporary. And that is the reason why when you read Achebe, we read Shoyinka, we read, then we see that the influence of orality in those writings. Just like when I read Tanure, either dealing with some of those figures, Mother Luto or the others, you find that really even the tone and the rhythm of that orality gives it a sense of authenticity, that lyrical, this is that you don't find necessarily in other, traditions, other poems, other writings. And so it is something that we pointed out in the Sankofan tradition, really, that is a very, very valuable, because until today, if you go to even all those oral literature is still going on. In fact, even in our contemporary times, either they recite a poetry during festivals or other things. It is going, but it is up to scholars to continue studying and showing a sense of continuity in the study of African literature. Starting from the orality.
There's a question in the chat from Joseph, who suggests that who was talking about blame and how Africa blames colonial masters for our wars, and Joseph suggests that counterparts in Asia and Latin America don't. He also suggests that maybe we do not admit our failures. And then he also suggests, saying things about Africa and migration, that this, I don't know, I can't even, I find, as chair, I fundamentally disagree with where Joseph is coming from. So I can't even start to engage. But maybe you could say what maybe you could respond. What do you think about
You've not really
colonialism? Is colonialism over?
Yeah. How do you say? See, let's say, but they put in place things to exploit Africa. Look at the case of Niger. If you are in Niger with a lot of uranium, and France and European Union are buying that uranium at less than $2 an ounce, and it's over $200 an ounce in the market, and France was monopolizing that, how can you ever be rich? See, the point is that we have our faults. See, that's not the only fault, but to say that everything is our fault, no. See, there were things put in place with colonialism. If look at the case of the Francophone countries in West Africa, their currency is made in France. France keeps their money, has their central banks, and they pay interest on their own money. Is that still, so it's not quite over. You see that colonialism is still not quite over. And see, some of us are not saying that the whole blame should be given to outsiders. See, but when you disable somebody, when you underdevelop somebody, you can make that person incapable of being useful to himself or herself for the rest of his life. But we have to claim our own agency and do so. We have our faults. The rulers, even the rules, the embezzlement in places like Nigeria, the corruption. But we cannot exonerate the colonial masters yet. We cannot exonerate them yet. They've done so much damage. They've done so much damage. They are still involved in our politics. It may not be so open, but still there. So we cannot exonerate them. So I agree that we need to remove ourselves from such things. But who controls IMF and World Bank, where you go and take your loan? See, some people might just go to World Bank, European. You think Ukraine is going to pay for the money it's borrowing? But Africa, once you go there, you'll be indebted almost for life. And you need for your loans to be waived. So the point I'm trying to make, we are mostly responsible for our problems, but we should not exonerate what others have done and are still doing to us.
Yeah, I think this is really also a good question, really, in a sense that it's a part of the debate. In a sense that if we look at African history, the early generation of Nkrumah, Nyerere, Zik in Nigeria, Lumumba, you see that, and that is the reason why they were killed. They were murdered, assassinated by the Western world because they had the colonial mind. And so from the beginning, when they fought for independence, and then they will organize a conference like in Ghana, when the people like Lumumba for the first time, you see the Tanzanians were coming, stopped in Kinshasa, and asked the question, are there some liberating, some movement going on? And the people went to the indigenous city to take Lumumba and said, yeah, and they took Lumumba, went with Lumumba. You see, that they had that vision that at a certain point, and that is what the Sékou Touré also had. That is why Sékou Touré at a certain point said no to the French franc, to the Francophone, and this is, they had that vision, and they mapped out a certain way of liberating ourselves, that African countries cannot liberate themselves in being too ethnocentric and probably divided. And that it is just like the United States, if we could come together, and the union and the be, one another's keeper, and they move, we will be able, in fact, even to overthrow, to undermine some of those colonial. And as I was saying, the Western world always will divide and conquer. We use that technique because the way when, for instance, Sékou Touré was fighting against that. Then you had Senegal and others who were now fighting against him there, that he should be, is almost like, a renegade, So you have, that is our the responsibility, in a sense that because of a corruption, dictatorship that came, individualistic, ethnocentrism, all those faults, those pitfalls have now sunk us more and more and more, instead of us, yielding to some kind of finding a way to return to the ideas that really established that the OAU at that time, the African Union, that concept to come back there. Now it's fighting there. This country wants to separate, this one wants to do, and then there is, because there is no, I don't see why in the Congo we have a lot of land, fertile land, and now Ethiopians are now there. You have dried, you have, things becoming the climate, And why, if we had been united, those things wouldn't have been, you should have been moving. You know, people move to the Congo and they live there, others live there, and then that would have been a really our situation, you know, that should have led us into coming out of the decolonization that is perpetual, because the Western world they take advantage of, you know, our also the ineptitude of our leaders, because as we were saying last time, we don't have a really strong leadership in the manner that we had during those years, you know.
And we've also got Efua, Maisa, and Francis, who got things that they would like to say. I don't know if you can try unmuting yourselves.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I have 3 questions. They're more literature-based questions. My first question is, what were the main differences in terms of themes and styles between the different languages, the different authors writing in their quote colonial languages? So that's my first question. What were the main differences in themes and styles that you saw when you were editing and arranging your book? My second question is, do you have any recommendations for writers to look out for, a new generation of writers from the diaspora that we should make a note of, to look out for, who might blow up as much as Adichie or Teju Cole or Caleb Zuma Nelson or Jiasi? And my third question is about distribution. I went to another discussion where somebody brought up the issue of distribution within Africa, and that being one of the main blockers for writers in Africa to become more well-read, become more popular and more visible within Africa, instead of looking to the West, instead of looking to France and the UK and Portugal and Spain, Europe and the US to publish and become popular. We should be looking in the African continent, but there are distribution issues. I don't know if you have any thoughts on those, on that issue. Thank you.
Tanure?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think you can. I can. Yeah, talk about it. You ask about the difference between francophone, anglophone, and perhaps lusophone. I will talk about the new writers.
Yeah.
What advice, if any, one should give to them?
So you're telling the writers, you know, the new neo-diasporic, especially the certainly the Janusian ones coming up now, the new ones. We have a lot, and if you look at the anthology there, in addition to the ones you have mentioned there are francophone and lusophone, a young, almost like every 3 months I see a novel coming, and the book of poetry, and they are really massive, you know. And so if you have access to this handbook, what we did was really to assemble the maximum we could, and it's a lot really there, you know, which the list is really it's about the 46 and more writers, almost like 50 writers that treated here, in addition to the ones you have mentioned, so that if you go online and you look at even the chapters of the book, you will find many of those in new writings. And again, if you see, we describe in our introduction, and if you read those essays, the styles, most of them are really there it's a combination of several novelistic techniques. So you have now the cyberspace, the blogosphere, the combination of metaphorical, imagery and even, metonymic narration, the real discursive combined realism. And so the grotesque realism, they make an episodic structure which you find not a conventional style, story and that. And so you have all of them really, and dealing with the themes, like you find the themes like homosexuality, which normally was not being dealt with a lot, disability, gender, class, race, and all those are the main, and then the environment. The environment has become also almost like every novel you take. You see the novel dealing with the theme of the environment because they address the situation of our time, and in addition to relationships. So you have a variety of all those themes that they deal with in this volume across all the writings, except that in the use of symbols and metaphors and techniques, like orality, for instance, the Sankofan generation will be much more inclusive. Will include more of those. But I don't know. Tanure, you want to say something?
Yeah, when we talk about the new writers, as if some of the older ones are still not writing, as if they stopped writing. Yeah, that's what it means. I think some of us in the Sankofan wave are still writing, and we can see that there's still a lot of writing going on. I wanted to look at we talk about if there's any advice for the younger writers. Usually, the prayers of any parents is to have children who are better off, who are richer, better off than themselves. So there's a lot going on. But my only concern is when you're in almost like a limbo status, you are neither in heaven, you are not in hell, to use a Western trope. See, when someone says it's not African, I'm not African, I'm not this. See, I don't think there's anything wrong in being an African in America or a Sudanese in Britain. I feel sometimes, I think your location, your upbringing gives you a certain identity. You see a lot of folklore and orality in the early writers. It's not that these younger ones, they did not stay in Africa enough to know much about orality or even the folklore of Africa. That doesn't matter. But the idea that you're an African, you say you're not African. I've never seen a European who goes somewhere else. A European comes to Africa, comes to Nigeria, or he goes to Congo and says, "Oh, I'm a young one." I said, "No, I'm not British. I'm a Congolese British," or just different terms. I would think that that's what bothers me. It bothers me when people are uncomfortable in being seen as African. Of course, if they're not seen as African, they are seen as black. Let me put that word, black. They are seen as black. And they are still not tolerated in the canons of the mainstream. See, these writers we are talking about, nobody's teaching American literature and is going to teach Paul. Nobody's teaching American literature and is going to teach Adishe. Nobody is teaching British literature and teaching Helen, the Nigerian British writer. So my point is that, see, you can acknowledge your origin at least and still be where you are. It doesn't do you any harm. People, when you disregard your own place of origin, it's like somebody spitting at his parents' grave. See, if you don't have respect for where you come from, how do you expect others to respect you? So I feel that our younger writers, however talented you are, it could be the African psyche or something in the African something, your DNA, that's still helping you to write. So I DJ cannot say it's not Nigerian, totally, from the Usuka, from the everything she goes with. So it's not just her. I'm not just talking about her, but younger writers should acknowledge their Africanness, that the Africans. You can be an African and be anything. You can be African and be whatever lifestyle you want to pursue, but you're an African in a different setting. So I think that's what I'll say about that. You could talk about, we talk about the having African literary works read everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we talked about translation already, but yeah, you can address that.
And the distribution that, yeah, that's really a problem. What is probably good at this moment is that we have ebooks. And so it is much, now with the new technology, it is easy for African countries to have access, but even ebooks, they're expensive. You know, if your salary is not so, that's what we, at least in the case of Congo, how much is a professor paid there, and there is no provision for the library to give you all those facilities, enough resources to be able to have access to that, then it becomes problematic. So it is something that we who are in a diasporic space can do something about. For instance, through yearly and others, and they try to garner some funds to assist. We used to have that at a certain point, but I don't know now, because we have some sponsorships, especially for scholars who come to attend the conferences, but it is one or two, and then they come here, we interact. But African libraries, especially having access through ebooks and technologies, it is something that, again, we should really encourage our governments there, and they see what we can do from here, so that people can have access to what is being produced here, and we too can have access to what is being produced there, and so the distribution that way will be. But as it is now, it's very difficult. In fact, when some contributors received the copies of our book, they were surprised, because Routledge sent the books to some of the books were received, the copies were received in Nigeria before Tanure and I got our own copies here.
Yeah.
And it was because, the publishers, a rich publisher, and they were well organized, they could do that. But then a copy of the book was costing $280 by that time. Now, how do you get it there to individuals? So that is, it's a problem, again, as you, but we have to keep on working on it as associations, as members of associations.
Maybe I could add that there are so many rich people in Africa, despite the overwhelming poverty. If some rich Africans could could support a publishing house, a big publishing house, maybe the African Union itself, which Ambrose you're working with. See, there should be a publisher in Africa that should be able to publish at a rate that Africans that we make books not too expensive to be distributed in Africa. So if there's such a publishing house, even if works are published in the West, they could still be republished in Africa. The same book could be published in Africa, and it could be sold at that rate for people. But it needs to be there needs to be some subvention that somebody is supporting this publishing house, a big publishing house. There are many rich people in Africa, and they could put some of their wealth into that type of enterprise, so that we have books. See, now there are books published in. There used to be a time when Hanneman, Longman, all these multinationals were publishing, and we can just follow what is happening. But now I don't believe it's the same, especially those within Africa, that the book is published in Ghana, those people in Nigeria we know, or a book is published in Kenya and so forth. And the same thing with the Francophone, I believe. So if we have that type of thing, there'll be room for translations and publishing within Africa. We cannot dictate to others, outsiders, to the West, oh, your book is too expensive. No, all we can do is to support ourselves, to have a system in which things will be done in such a way that we can afford it.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know how much, if you've got time for a few more questions.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, that's okay. We are here to 3.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Maybe before we go to the next person who's got a question, Efua, what are your thoughts about the response that you've received?
Yeah, there lots to think about. I especially like the idea that the themes, the main themes that are coming out, how they kind of touch on kind of a lot of issues that are happening that affect Africans in Africa at the moment, and the kind of humanistic side that's coming from the offshoot generation, but also, of course, the Sankofan generation is still writing, so we have to focus on them, as well. The advice to not be ashamed of being African. I actually made a note. I think recently there has been this pushback, and I suspect that it might be coming from America, and there has started to be a pushback from African Americans to want to feel more American rather than African, and maybe that is affecting possibly the way that we want to be seen, who have been born and brought up outside of Africa. And it's a tension that will always be there in the offshoot generation, because we were born outside Africa, and when we go to African countries, we're not African. We can be seen as not African but foreigners, but then when we go to the country of our birth outside of Africa, we're not fully we're not natives there. So there's this tension. And I think that's played out in America as well. And it can affect the Black population kind of worldwide as well. And I just, for the distribution, I completely agree as well that we need help. It's a really big problem. There's so many authors who are excellent authors, but we can't all be running to the West to get published. It would be wonderful to kind of have the same experience that Western authors get in Africa, but it's going to need a lot of help. So he's hoping that there will be some rich benefactors, Dangote or somebody who can, step in the future and kind of help with that, because it is needed, and there's so many stories that are yet to be told that we want to hear. So thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, very good.
We are listening to Professors Losambe and Ojaide, who are editors of the Routledge Handbook of the New African Diasporic Literature. This conversation is taking place as part of the African Migration Report Poetry Anthology series, which we are currently working on. The Poetry Anthology series was inspired by the African Migration Report produced by the African Union and IOM, which presents research on African migration and mobility. And while the AU and IOM's report is a formal report, our poetry anthology explores the past, present, and futures of African migration through poetry, prose, and conversations such as these with poets and other writers who are working on the theme of African migration. we've got an open call for submissions. The call is open 365 days a year because every day is Africa Day. So on this note, I say thank you and see you again next time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.